Welcome to TFC Transplant Talk, where you'll find the most up-to-date information on topics that matter most to you and your loved ones. Join us in our engaging recorded interview series between transplant healthcare professionals and families living the transplant journey. We are your partners in transplant information, improving the lives of both the recipient and everyone around them.
Oh, I would just want to thank you, Darnell, for being here with us. Thank you to all the moms that are joining us, because this will be really important for everyone to get a lot of great information. So Darnell, if you can start and introduce and give us some information on your story, that would be great.
Well, thank you very much. I had to make sure I was off mute. So a lot of you probably know me from other interactions that I've been on, but for those of you who don't know my story, I'm a liver transplant recipient. I was transplanted as an adult from a deceased donor in Philadelphia. I was stationed out on the East Coast with the Air Force, and so that's what got me out to Philadelphia for my actual transplant. And so my story is probably not unlike a lot of other people's story in that we are fine and then we get sick. We end up really having what we call an end-stage disease process, meaning that it's a major organ system that the body can no longer reverse that process. And so as a result, we get that end-stage disease process, and then the rest of our body tries to compensate. But ultimately what happens is our quality of life is significantly impacted. And that's probably one of the big things that leads to transplant, is that it's not so much a diagnosis as much as how is this impacting our quality of life. And so I spent 28 years in the Air Force Nurse Corps, and when I was transplanted, I knew nothing about transplant. I was commanding a hospital in Dover, Delaware, and so I didn't know anything about transplant. And so when I do my teaching, which is my main job right now, I do patient education at university's transplant center in the adult program. But I think one of the things that I bring to that as that experience of being a transplant recipient is I know the things that I wish I would have known when I was going through that process initially at the very beginning of my journey. And so I've been pretty much moving around the transplant world for the last 14 years or so. I initially started out as a patient educator, and then as our program evolved, I started working more as a clinical nurse specialist, but still always doing the patient education. And so that's the thing. When I was hired at the transplant center, they had me interview for the executive position that is held by Jennifer Milton. And so they figured, well, you were commanding a hospital, you should be able to step into this position. But I did not have any experience in transplant. I had an N of 1, that was me, and I slept through most of that. And the other thing was that I had, in all my experience, my medical experience had been in the Air Force, which that military system is extremely different from the civilian system. And so it took me about 35 seconds to convince them that I wasn't their guy. And so when they asked me the question, and if you had your choice, what would you be doing? I said, I'd be in scrubs working with the patients at the bedside, because that's what I miss the most. Just being a nurse, that's what I miss the most, being an admin. And so what really got me into transplant was my transplant. And I like to say that I got into transplant by accident, but I've stayed in transplant for a purpose. And so all of you probably have the same sense that I do, that we've been very blessed. And so I don't know, I'm assuming that everybody is post-transplant, or are there some people waiting for transplant as well? Is there anybody who is not post-transplant or dealing with a...
I'm actually both.
Okay, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
both
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah. So,
check
but
both those boxes.
I think we realize that how blessed we are in having had a transplant or being exposed to transplant. And so my whole purpose really was to be able to share my experience, my family's experience, with the people I come into contact with every single day. And so when they asked me that question, I said, you know, it's clear that if I had my choice, I'd be in scrubs working at the bedside with patients and their families. And that's what I've been doing since 2007, when I joined university's transplant team. At that time, we were a much smaller program, so I was able to work with Anita Saldana, who many of you know, dabbling in the pediatric side because our adult program was not as large, anywhere near as large as it is today. And we've now split off the adult and pediatric programs from each other. And so I'm primarily working with the adults, but I think a lot of my experience can be put into any perspective that you're coming from, because we all are blessed by having been a transplant recipient, but we're also looking for ways to give back, ways to give us the best quality of life for the longest amount of time that we can. And so now I can hear you, Joanne. So
Okay.
whatever you did, are you with somebody who's pre-transplant?
We're
That what you're-
post-transplant, waiting for second transplant.
Okay. So that is not uncommon, especially in our pediatric population, where people are transplanted early in life, and then just through the normal cycle of that transplanted organ, they need to be transplanted over again. And so those are the kinds of things that depend pretty much on how good that organ is working for you. And it's not uncommon at all for people, particularly with our kidneys, to need to be retransplanted at some point in their life. And we have people that we work with in the adult program that are walking around with 5 kidneys. They're 2 native kidneys, and I've had 3 transplants. One as a young child, one as maybe a teenager or a young adult, and then again later on in life. And so it's not uncommon for those kinds of things to happen. But like I said, it's the purpose of what I'm doing. I'm really, not only do I want to share what my family's been through, but I want to carry on the legacy of the person who made this happen for me. I received the liver I had a deceased donor organ. So I received the liver of a 43-year-old woman who had 2 small children that died of a stroke suddenly. And her story is very interesting because she was one of, I think, 10 children in her family. And 5 years before her death, her brother received a heart transplant. And so that changed the whole dynamic of that family as far as being organ donors. I think a lot of the organ donor issues out there are that people have not been personally impacted by organ donation and by transplantation. And as soon as we have that impact, we have that relationship with transplant, then we have a whole different focus, and we start looking, our family members are more sensitized and say, I want to be a donor if something ever happens to me, or I want to be a living donor. I think we have an opportunity to sensitize the people around us in our circle and beyond, because we're living proof that this is something that works, or our children are living proof that this works. And so this is something that I take really seriously, as far as when I engage with folks. I'm not taking just my experience, but I'm taking my donor in with me at every time, saying, she's the person who made this possible. I would have been dead for years had this not taken place. And so every day, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about my donor. I honor her memory by staying as healthy as I can, and by taking my medications religiously to protect that gift that she gave me. And sometimes the gifts just wear out, and due to no fault of our own. Sometimes it's because of the medications that we're taking. They will damage other organs. I'm a liver transplant recipient, but they're watching my kidneys like a hawk because I've been on Prograf for 15 years. And so, there's this whole dynamic that we've got, that I take it seriously, that we have a mission, that we've been blessed with this opportunity to live this lifestyle, but I think we have a mission to share that with other folks. And that's why it's such a privilege to come on to calls like this, or to work with other people, and really let them know that we really should be proud of where we're at in our lives, and that is something that we've been given this opportunity. Now, in addition to being a registered nurse and a patient educator, I also have the unique privilege of being the chair of the Patient Affairs Committee at the Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the OPTN, but that's the national network that oversees all transplantation in the United States. And it's actually the people who have that contract for the Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network is UNOS, which probably sounds more familiar to you. So UNOS is the nonprofit organization based in Richmond, Virginia, that really oversees all of the things going on in transplantation in the United States. And so they set the regulations. They're the people that do the matching when a donor becomes available, a deceased donor comes available. They do the matching so that they can get this out to the people who need it the most. They manage the network that has all 100,000 plus people waiting for transplants of all types across the nation. And so as the chair of the Patient Affairs Committee, when you become chair of that committee, that means that you've had 6 years of experience on the Patient Affairs Committee already, because you kind of ascend to that position. And so I have an opportunity to lead a team of 17 people who are all patient focused. And when I use the term patient, it refers to people who are candidates waiting for a transplant, transplant recipients, living donors, and all their family members. And so my committee is comprised of a lot of people that gives input into the policy that's being made for national transplant strategy across the entire United States. And so it gives me a really good opportunity. We have 11 regions, and so I have 11 regional representatives on my committee that represent the various geographic regions across the United States. I have myself, my vice chair, and I also have there's 4 at-large positions that include a physician, because a lot of the people who are on that committee don't have any medical background like I do. So I'm fairly comfortable in dealing with the lingo and the terminology of transplantation, but we have a provider on there to just kind of clarify from that perspective some of the things that are going on. So it's reassuring to a lot of people to know that UNOS has a committee that is focused specifically on the patient, and they go to us because everything that all the regulations, all the rules, all the things that UNOS makes either directly or indirectly impact patients. And I spent most of my tenure on the Patient Affairs Committee bringing that to the forefront, that I don't care if you're looking at histopathology, which is something is completely weirded out and it takes a very special person to do that kind of stuff, or whether you're making decisions on the allocation of organs to different populations of people. Any decision that's going on or anything that's being discussed at UNOS or the Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network directly or indirectly impacts patients. And so I'm thrilled to be able to have that hat as well, because it really allows me to engage on the national stage with a lot of people that are primarily interested in what is the patient impact of all these regulations and all the rules and things that are going on in transplantation. So that's a third hat that I wear. And many times it's hard to tell which hat I'm wearing when I'm talking, because they're kind of intertwined with each other. But that's my story. The Halloween day was my 15-year anniversary of my transplant. I continued to do well. I had an autoimmune disorder that caused damage to my bile ducts, which then causes infections and damages the liver. And so that autoimmune disorder has reinfected my new liver. That happened in 2013, 8 years after my transplant. But I'm doing well with that. It's a slow-moving disease. And so it's one of those things that doesn't define my life, but it's something that I keep in the back of my mind if I'm not feeling well. So let's go to your questions so that I'm not taking up all the time talking about myself. I want to find out what you're interested in and the kinds of things that you want to know about. It's nice to be back on the Transplants for Children couch and having conversations with you again.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'm Laura. I'm sorry. I'm Laura. I'm the parent liaison, but I'm also a transplant mom. My son Ricky's had 2 heart transplants. So we are very blessed. I really understand when you've been through that process, you do feel very blessed, and we always want to try and help others. If we can possibly help others, we always want to try and help others. But our first question we have is, how closely do you work with family members that are going through the transplant process?
So I think anybody who's had a transplant or is waiting for a transplant knows how important families are. And so it's hard to separate out. I would be very suspicious if somebody came forward with just a patient or just a candidate saying, I want to be transplanted without having the support of family. And so my whole interactions in the transplant center are always involving patients. Are always involving their family members. In fact, for most centers, not having family support or having a good social support is a contraindication to transplant, because they're so important in the recovery process. I think a lot of the things that families don't realize is that a lot of these disease processes are slow moving. Now, there are those occasional acute things where somebody is fine today and totally sick with organ failure tomorrow. That happens every once in a while. But for most of us, I think that the issue is that these are slow moving things, and family members pick up little bits and pieces of things. So as I got sicker and sicker, it's like get through the next day, and then it's like looking in the mirror. You don't realize you're getting old when you're looking at yourself every day. But when somebody hasn't seen you for a year, they say, "Oh my goodness, Darnell, life has really stressful for you. But these are the kinds of things that are slow moving. And so family members pick up little bits and pieces, and even people who aren't in the direct household. I had no idea. I was 50 years old when I was transplanted, and my parents were in their mid 70s, and they were totally stressed out by the fact that their baby was having a transplant. So no matter how old you are, you're somebody's baby. And so I didn't realize that we were hundreds of miles away from each other. But this whole situation really creeps out into all family members. And many times we're dealing with just the direct caregivers and things. But there are a lot of family members that are totally stressed out by having a loved one in this kind of a situation. And so I don't even speak with my candidates after, or my recipients after transplant, unless there's family members either there or now with COVID. We do a lot of things, virtually. But it's so important to be surrounded by people who know your story, who know your capabilities, and can help fill in the gaps, particularly right after transplant, when we're trying to learn a new lifestyle, trying to recover from big surgeries. These are all things where families are so important to our recovery. And so I think education gives them power. And so as an educator, that's what I try to do, is to work with not only the recipients or the candidates in some cases, but the families.
Okay. And now, how about for someone who's outside the immediate family? How can they be supportive before and after transplant, like friends that are not like immediate family?
One of the things that, when I hear that question, one of the things that immediately jumps to my family is living donation, or to my mind is living donation, and the importance of family and your circle for that. There are so many opportunities out there that I think are lost because family members don't know how to share or can't share that with other people that are in their friends and family circle. And so for me, probably the ultimate thing that outside of our immediate family can help us with is really being approached about being a living donor. And sometimes it's just a matter of bringing that to people's attention. We have a program that's just starting up at university, and there are other centers across the nation that are starting this program, but as a donor advocate program where there's people that become a champion for that person who's looking for a donor. Because all of you know that when you're the immediate family member dealing with somebody who's either waiting for a transplant or has had a transplant, you're busy, you are worn out. And so, people are being taken to dialysis, you're helping taking care of the day-to-day needs of these folks. And so you don't have the energy or the time to be looking for a living donor if you're looking for a living donor situation. And so we have these donor advocacy, donor champion programs where somebody in your friend and family circle takes over that responsibility, and they start working through social media or whatever they've got available to them to put the word out that so-and-so is in need of a kidney or a liver or lungs. And so, we don't do a lot of living donor lung transplants, but there are some being done in the United States, particularly in young folks, because, and the reason people aren't doing a lot of living donor lung transplants is because it takes 2 donors. So they take one of the lobes off of the right or the left lobe of a donor, and so they transplant just one lobe of a lung into each side. And so it takes 2 donors to really have it successful, because most of those are bilateral lung transplants. And so you're going to primarily hear about this in the liver and the kidney populations. Is that the kidney populations, somebody donates one of their kidneys, and we are able to live on one kidney, have a very high productive quality of life with one kidney. In the case of livers, they remove a portion of the donor's liver. The thing about a healthy liver is that it regenerates as long as we keep the blood flow going to it. And so we've been able to successfully fine-tune that process to make it possible to do living donor organs for both kidneys and livers. But I think for one of the main things is to get that word out in your family and your social circles that living donation may be an option for your loved one. And so when you're talking about people outside the immediate family, there's another component to that. And it's really, are they able to relieve you from give you respite if you need to have those kinds of things, to be able to be close enough to your family situation to say, I need you to get out of town, go to Fredericksburg for the weekend and just get away for a while. Friends and family circles many times are willing to do that, but they don't know what's going on in your household necessarily. And so it's hard for them to come in and say, let me do this for you. And many times I think as caregivers, I know my family did the same thing. They don't intentionally hide the fact that they're worn out and tired, but they present this positive image that I'm okay. I'm on top of this. And sometimes it takes another person to be able to say, you know, you look like you need to have a break. A lot of times they can just support those little things. Many times our other family interactions take back seat, namely marriages, caring for other children, take back seat to the fact that we have somebody in our household, in our lifestyle, or in our life that needs to have my attention right now. And so this gives people an opportunity to step back and say, I can only take care of another person if I'm taking care of myself. And so people outside of your immediate circle who are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis many times can step in and give respite to family members who are not struggling, but just need to take that break and step away from it all for a day or so, or even a weekend, and get out and do those things.
Okay. Yeah, it's true. It's true. As parents, sometimes we don't know that we're tired because we're just going. We just don't realize it. Yeah. So it's true. It's
Yeah,
true.
you're absolutely right. And so I think as parents, it's important to recognize the fact that this is probably one of the most tumultuous times in your life. And you need to sometimes step back and say, you know, and everybody's family is different. We have families who are headed by a single adult, and we have people who have 4 generations in their household. And so it varies from family to family. So what works for one family is not always going to work for another family. And so it's important that we look at what are the dynamics going on in my family, and it's okay to ask for help. But like you said, we're proud of what we're doing. This has kind of grown on us, and it's, you know, one day leads into the next, and you know, you started this out not being on dialysis, but now you're going to dialysis 3 times a week, and you know, it just kind of, you've incorporated that into the daily workings of your family. And it's hard sometimes for us to step back and say, I need to find a way to just take a break from this. It's okay to do that. Give yourself permission to do that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Now let me ask you: are there outside resources, companies, or groups that you recommend parents and families to work with in order to make the process smoother?
I think probably the least understood, the most underutilized people are the social workers that you're working with, because by the nature of their training, if you're working with a transplant center, either pre-transplant or after transplant, that center's total resources are available to you. And so probably the people who work most behind the scenes for outside sources are our social workers that are involved in those kinds of things. And so they have, by the nature of their training, they can mobilize resources on your behalf that you didn't even know was available. The one thing that I would encourage everybody to look at outside of the normal things that you would think of is go to unos.org. The Organ Procurement Transplantation Network that is managed by UNOS right now. If you go to unos.org, they have an entire patient portal on there that's talking about all the things that are going on in transplantation. The big red glaring things right now are, what are we doing with COVID? You know, how's that impacting transplantation? And I would be willing to talk to you about that if you want to for a little bit. But the unos.org is a place where they've got information, what every parent needs to know. I think Transplants for Children is aware of that product that's been recently published by the United Network for Organ Sharing. There's what every patient needs to know that answers tons of questions, but are focused specifically on those 2 populations. What every patient needs to know is primarily focused on the adult population. What every parent needs to know, well, we developed that focus specifically on children and for parents, so they would have an idea of what kinds of things are going on in this environment. Like I said, when I started working in transplantation, that was when I really realized how much I didn't know about transplant when I was going through this process, because it's just not something, you have these these occasional engagements with the transplant center, and you don't always know exactly how does this fit into the big giant picture of what's going on around me. For each and every one of the people who are candidates or waiting for an organ, there's this huge logistical dance going on around each of you that starts at your center with your coordinator and goes all the way up to UNOS. And so if you understand how that's going on, what's going on around that, it really helps. And so I have developed, when I first got to the transplant center, I developed a 3-hour program that really walks the whole journey from where people are as a candidate all the way through to what drugs they can expect to be on after their transplantation. So things aren't just happening to me. I've now been educated on that entire journey, and not in specificity, but just in general, so that when they're calling you to do an update for your labs, you realize why they're doing those things. Where does that fit into the big picture? And so that's where the education piece of it is so important. And the more I know about something, the less stressed I am. And
Yeah.
so, and so there are a lot of resources. I am not somebody who knows. There are tons of groups that are focused on children. There are people, there's TRIO, which is the Transplant Recipient International Organization. David, have you been in contact with TRIO? But there are all kinds of specific age-related and organ-related things out there that people can look at to really give them some idea of what to go to. But like I said, I think one of the most overlooked sites on the internet is unos.org, in that there's tons of stuff on there. It's constantly being updated, and there's just a wealth of information that it's not something that I was told about when I was waiting for transplant. But if I had known about that and accessed some of those learning materials, that would have been a big help to me and my family.
That's true. That's true. That's a good website. Now, the last question I have on here is, with a lot of our transplant kiddos, as they're growing up, a lot of them, they always say, oh, I want to go into the medical field, or they're going to study the medical field. And we actually have some of our mentors who are going to school for nursing. What would you recommend for them to go into that field? Or because a lot of our kids, they want to give back or help back. Would you recommend for them to go for it and get into that medical field and as a way to give back?
Without a doubt, go for it. A lot of people are concerned that because we're immune suppressed, that somehow limits our ability to work. And to a certain extent, it does, but in the most minor ways. I don't go into pediatric clinics because they're giving out live virus immunizations in a pediatric clinic. My life is fulfilled and worthwhile and without going into a pediatric clinic. So, you know what I mean? And so, but I think a lot of people have this misconception that if you've had a transplant, you're somehow sick. And so I rarely refer to our folks as patients when I'm talking to them. I call them recipients, because I'm a registered nurse, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I'm a husband, I'm all these things, and I just happen to have had a liver transplant. So being a recipient does not define my life, but I think that's somewhat of a mental process that you have to go through to say, I am going to make a difference. And I will tell you, you talk to anybody who has had one of these experiences that's working at the bedside with you as a professional, totally different dynamic than somebody who's never been through that. You know, we hear the doctors at the bedside saying, we're going to put this little tube in your throat, and I said, and you're going to be fine, and you know, we're going to do this, do that. And I said, how many tubes have you had put in your throat? How do you know what's going to happen? But when I walk in and people realize that I'm a transplant recipient, they go, oh, you know, somebody who knows my journey. And it's a little different than for every person, but it gives people a sense that these are people who have walked in my shoes for a while. And so whether they want to become a respiratory therapist, a CNA, a nurse, a physician, I say go for it, because these are the people that we need to have in our medical environment that really, truly know what people are going through. And people can say that, like me, say, I know what you're going through when you're having a baby. I don't. I've seen it. But you know what I mean, is that I don't truly know what you're going through delivering that baby. But when you have somebody that's in the transplant world and comes through, there's not a lot of us. And so we really bring something very, very special to the medical field. And I think that there's just this sense of relief that somebody has walked in my shoes and truly knows what I'm talking about.
Yes, that's great. I like that. Thank you.
And I would love to mentor anybody who wants to go into the medical field, because and like I said, it doesn't have to be nursing, but it's just one of those things where it's a matter of sitting down with somebody and saying, you can do this. I work in the dirtiest place on the face of the earth called a hospital, but I don't get sick. And the reason for that is I recognize what I need to do to minimize my risk, as do all of us. This whole COVID thing, it just brought the rest of planet Earth into a transplant person's environment. We wash our hands, we wear a mask when we're out in environments where we don't know the people who are in our space. We do social distancing as much as we can. And so I tell people, you're just being brought into, the rest of the planet Earth is being brought into my world as a transplant recipient, because this is a thing we do. I never wash my hands without drying my hands first and using the paper towel to shut off the faucet and open the public restroom door. I don't even think about that anymore, but these are little things that we do to make it safe for us to work, like I said, in almost any environment in the medical world.
That's true. That's true. We're the same way. Yeah, it's the same. We're exactly the same way.
Yeah, and it's not something new for us. It's just like, duh, we've been doing this
We've been doing it
for life. Get over it.
Yeah.
I've been avoiding viruses for 20 years.
Yeah, and that's what we do. And we don't even think about that. But when I go into a patient's room, they see me shutting the faucet off. We role model so much that we don't even realize that we're doing it, because it's unique to them, to the people who are watching us, but it's not unique to us. It's just what we do. It's part of our lifestyle, and we move on, and we have great quality of life, and we do the things that we want to do within the realms of our restrictions.
Okay. I'm going to open the floor to the moms that we have here. I'm just going to ask the moms, when you come before your question, if you can just say your name and transplant, pre, post, just so Darnell knows if you're pre or post. So Joanne, Alexis, if you have any questions. Lumi, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad. I know you're fairly new, and your baby's waiting. So I know if you have any questions, just come on in. Linda, if you have any questions.
And be sure to unmute.
I'm unmuted, guys, because I get on Zooms all the time for work. My name is Linda Osuna. I have a baby that was born a year ago without a working immune system. It's rare. Nobody in the world has ever had what she has. And we had a transplant a year ago in October, and it was unsuccessful. So we're waiting another transplant, which will take place. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me take off my camera so y'all can see me. Sorry about that. So actually, I'm at the doctor's office with my baby right now, guys. So that's why I didn't chime in too much in the beginning. We're actually waiting for the second transplant, which will take place in January or February, as soon as we find a match. I can't do it myself because I have multiple sclerosis, but I have an identical twin sister, so they're going to look into her to see if she can be the donor this time. The first time we had a stem cell transplant, so they couldn't get any more cells for her. So I do like getting on the Zoom. I'm fairly new to transplant for children, since I've only had a year experience with this, but I do like everything you had to say as far as people living like in a sort of a bubble and exposing themselves to germs when they should have already been more cautious as far as what they're touching or what they're exposing their children to. So I do understand how people can become so complacent right now, not wearing their masks, or just seeing it as an inconvenience to be like safe, washing your hands, stuff like that. But for myself, my daughter has no working immune system right now. So it's really scary during the pandemic to even take her out. We're currently at a doctor's appointment because whatever she was born with affects her skin, and she's got a rash all over her skin, and we don't know what it is or what's going to happen. So we're just waiting to see what they can tell us, how they can treat it. So it's good to know that you can have supportive family members and other people that have been through transplants. Okay, sorry, here you go. And you're not completely and totally alone. Sorry about that. This is Ellie. Ellie, can you say hi to everybody?
Hi, Ellie.
Say hi.
Oh, she's beautiful.
Yeah, so I am used to multitasking, getting on Zooms for work. I'm still working currently. I don't plan on taking any time off until actually we're back in the hospital. I was like everyone else who has a transplant and thinks it's going to be successful and you're never going to go through it again. Everything's okay. That's how naive I was, because I didn't have enough information, and I thought once we got the transplant, everything was okay. It's not to scare any of the other moms who haven't had a transplant yet. It's just to be open to maybe needing another transplant in the future, and there's nothing wrong with it. It just means that the first one wasn't successful. So that's where we're at right now. We're waiting for a second transplant. It's going to be a bone marrow transplant from a live donor. So that's what we're waiting on.
Linda, you bring up a very important term, and that is fatigue. I think that what we're seeing in the COVID situation right now is that people are suffering from COVID fatigue, and so they're tired of it. They don't want to be doing this anymore. We could have done it for a couple of weeks. We could have done it for a couple of months, maybe. But this whole thing is just getting to be a little bit out of control. And so people are fatigued by that. And so they don't wear their masks. They don't wash their hands. They're going to a lot of social situations where they probably should not be. And there's going to be always that inadvertent exposure that you're going to have to people. But the fatigue thing right now, even after transplantation, we sometimes get fatigued. Even though I'm 15 years out, I've been taking medications for that whole time. Sunday nights, I said, oh, I got to fill my pill box again. And it's just, you kind of just get tired of the routine of all the stuff that we have to do. And that's where it's important that you have recognized that, and hopefully you have somebody that you can rely on to give you a break. And I know it's hard to do that when you have such a special situation that you do, but that's what we were talking about earlier in this whole thing, is that a lot of people describe this whole process as running a marathon, but nobody told us the distance. Just keep going, keep going, keep going. And so if knowing that you have a January or February potential time period, it gives you something to look forward to. That's where living donation is such a wonderful thing, is that you have at least a potential end in sight where you can have another opportunity to have this transplant to see if it works. But during that process, you need to make sure you're taking care of yourself in that as well. And hopefully you have family members or you have a social circle that can give you a bit of a break. And I think everybody on this call understands how difficult it is to do that, because we know best what is good for our children, what's best for our family. And so it's hard to relinquish that. But if you can find a way to get a little break for yourself, that would be wonderful, because this has got to be fatiguing. Like I said, it's like running a marathon, but we didn't say it's 26.2 miles. It's just, we're not gonna give you the distance. Just keep going, keep going, keep going. And that causes horrible fatigue. And so thanks for sharing that story with us. You've got a very unique situation that most of us will never have to deal with. And so stay engaged with us so that you can get the support of people who are in like situations, not the same, but in like situations, can really feel the angst that you're going through right now.
Darnell, let me, if Linda brought up a good point. Linda, I don't want to speak for you, but she brought up a good point about the messaging around becoming a donor can sometimes make someone who feels as though, I'll make sure that I get this right, they're going to go through this transplant process, that they're going to get a transplant, and that they're going to be well, they're going to be cured from any issue on the other side, that the transplant is really a cure, when in reality you're trading one disease that we know is probably fatal for another set of medical challenges on the other side. Can you help explain, when you first you do your training and your patient workout, kind of the reaction that people have to what is on the other side? Do people think that they're going to have a transplant and just magically be cured of medical issues on the other side?
Yeah, you bring up a very good point, David, and I myself had that same thing. I call it the battery change mentality, in that I'm going to get a new organ and boom, I'm good to go for another 150,000 miles. And you're exactly right. We are trading a chronic illness for a chronic condition, and it's something that is not maybe presenting itself as acutely to me on a day-to-day basis, but each day I can't forget the fact that I need to be monitoring this. I need to be taking my medications, because I've really literally switched from a chronic illness to a chronic condition. And those things can change on a dime. And so that's a really valid thing. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that most of us, myself included, thought somehow that this new liver is going to go in. And I did feel better, but it's not something that's like a car battery change where you slap it in and you're at 100%. We have to heal in body, mind, and spirit from this. And so some people think they focus on the incision and they forget that these are huge life-changing operations. These are things that impact a lot of the way that we think about things, because, why did I get this transplant and not somebody else get that? And, am I suitable? Am I worthy to have this kind of an opportunity in my life? Tons of things. But I think that all of us, to a certain extent, are looking forward to having that opportunity to have quality of life back again, whatever that means to you.
Mhm.
And that we do feel better in most cases. And there are truly, in Linda's case and others, that there's, I don't know if Joanne's got somebody who's waiting for a transplant again. I know somebody else on the call did, but these are things that just in the natural, it's not a cure, like you said. It's something that we're going to always have to keep an eye on. And the transplant network is set up to deal with these kinds of situations. And so, but I think it's very common for people to have this battery change mentality.
Yeah, I want to say this. Okay, so my child was transplanted in 2012. It was a preemptive transplant, so it was kidney, so we didn't have to have dialysis ever until the kidney rejected. And I was told at that time it was a cadaverate kidney. So I was told at the time it was going to last between 5 and 10 years. I think that age is a very important factor here, because if you're young and you have a transplant, you just have to be able to accept the fact that uh, you probably will at one point, go into rejection and need a second transplant, sometimes third. I know some that have had three. And I just feel like when we started with this, and it was a go, everything was good. It happened so fast, the transplant and everything. But then after we went into rejection, and now we're on dialysis, peritoneal at home, which is going rather well. There's some issues with phosphorus, and things like that is very common, because it just so happens that the things that Dylan likes to eat have phosphorus, but he's trying every day. Let's just say that, to adhere to the diet. But waiting, we had kind of, it started. We went into dialysis. We started dialysis in December of 2018. So we're almost 2 years, and Dylan's going to be 18 in January. So it's crunch time. I wanted to ask real quick: do we get COVID credit? Because I was told that we get COVID credit. That 18-year-old, that seems to be a big thing now. I'm getting rather nervous about, that maybe we've waited too long to get ready for transplant too. I know that Dylan is feeling that anxiety of maybe going into the larger pool when you turn 18, and then having to wait 6-7 years, as we've heard some people have had to, and all that. And I think that in the meantime, because I do consider transplant at this point gold standard for kidneys. We need to get another transplant to be able to not have to be on a machine, or have to do the dialysis hemo 3 times a week. I know Dylan's deathly afraid of hemo, because we used to walk by the, excuse me, and my phone goes off. My Dylan had to see the machines and the kids, but you know, I tried. It's unavoidable because we live in this world, and they see and they hear and they learn. They're very educated at a very young age about things that they're going to have to deal with. You know, I think that maybe my question is for the second transplant. I just feel like it's more of a waiting period, and more of a, it's not as, their doctors aren't quick to do it as far as kidneys are concerned, you know. And I don't know, I maybe I should be more assertive with our doctor and pushing the issue, but I want it to be a good thing. I want, of course, Dylan to, you know, I just feel like the first time we were in the hospital, 4 days, and we were out. And the worst thing that Dylan can remember about that transplant was having a catheter, an indwelling catheter. And I thought, well, is that the biggest thing that you worry about? Because now he says, well, maybe I don't have to have one now that I'm, you know, older. I can go to the bathroom.
You let me know if I'm right here. I think she's got two things. One, she's concerned if she's doing everything that she can possibly do to get Dylan's transplant as soon as possible. And I think she's worried about the transition to the adult clinic, which is a big part of course, what we do at TFC. If transition is something that you discuss with your patients, and as an advocate, are there things the things that maybe she's missing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne, for sharing those things. And you're exactly right, David. I don't deal with the transition program from the pediatric side because I work in the adult side of our program. But transitioning is a huge issue for folks. And I've been working with, probably 10 years ago or longer, I worked with Roddy McDowell, that whole group of folks over there with Anita, trying to come up with some way to do a transition program. These are extremely complex things that are going on because the people who are looking at transitioning many times have been dealing with a sick child or somebody with a chronic condition for years and years and years. And so you've always been able to have some input into what's been going on with those folks. I will tell you, in my personal opinion, the people that have the hardest time with transitioning are our pediatric nephrologists, because they've been dealing with you for decades. And then all of a sudden you're going over to this program, which is vastly different from a pediatric program. You know, it's an adult program. And so there isn't that constant oversight by the people that you trust and you've been trusting with your child's health for so many years. And so that's something that I would encourage you to continue working with the Transplants for Children. I don't know where your organization is with that, with the transition program, and in developing something that is going to work with the adult programs here in the city, but that is certainly a huge issue for a lot of people. The other thing, Joanne, that you brought up that a lot of people are not aware of is when we are looking at matching, particularly kidneys, we have to be very careful looking at the antibodies between the donor and the recipient. And so the antibodies are things that my body produces in response to an exposure to something like transfusions, pregnancies, transplants. The body will build up antibodies, just like we're talking about with the new COVID vaccine. You introduce something foreign into your body, and your body's immune system, even if it's suppressed, is going to develop antibodies to that. For our kidney population, that can cause some delay in getting matched with a deceased donor, simply because what we call the PRA, the panel reactive antibodies, are too high to accept an organ from the majority of the population. And so the allocation tables at UNOS that say who's going to get offered first take that into consideration with those folks who have a lot of antibodies. And so don't take on that responsibility that there may be something completely out of your control, Joanne, that has simply to do with the physiology, the way our body works when we introduce new things to it. And the people who are at the highest risk are people who have had a prior transplant, or people who have been exposed to a pregnancy, have blood transfusions. Some immunizations will develop that. So you are stuck right in the middle of a situation where it's this marathon and nobody's told you the distance. If you can work with your center to try to get somebody to help you on your behalf to identify potential living donors, that may be something that where you could start. But I don't want you to feel that you are responsible for pulling this off yourself. That these are all things that you've got a team, multiple teams of people with transplants for children. You've got your transplant nephrologist, you've got your transplant center. All those folks should be working together in tandem to make sure that we give Dylan the best chance to get a transplant as possible. But these are huge, Hetty. We could have a whole conference just on transitioning.
Thank you
It's
very
such a big
much.
thing.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and my daughter is a year and a half. She was born with a severe heart defect, and it was actually a very unique well, her situation was very unique. So she got put on the list at 1 month old, and her doctors didn't think she was going to make it to transplant because she was very sick. But she did receive her heart at 4.5 months old, and she's been doing wonderful. I think right now what we're dealing with, I mean, I think it's more like we just haven't really seen any family or anybody, because I'm just very like nervous. We just had our 1 year anniversary at the end of October. And so I'm struggling with, like, it's like I said, with COVID as well, like seeing family, we want so badly. Like, I haven't seen my brother in a year. I haven't seen my dad in over a year. Sorry, I get emotional all the time, especially right now. I'm pregnant again. So, but I think that's where I'm struggling right now, is just that seeing family.
And that's part of that COVID fatigue that we've been talking about, Alexis, where we are social beings. We need to have that interaction with people, and more than just on FaceTime or on a Zoom meeting. We need to touch people. We need to hug people. We need to feel people in our lives. And so it's, depending on how immune suppressed and what the risk is for your daughter, there may be some opportunities for you to have those kinds of interactions. But I can appreciate where you're at with not wanting to bring something that would be dangerous to her, like COVID-19. And I think that's what's contributing so much to our fatigue, is that if we, in our stress levels, which are totally normal, what you're experiencing is not unique to you. There are tons of people that are having these same experiences. And I'm assuming that your transplant center is outside of San Antonio.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
in Houston.
Yeah.
In Houston. And I think, like, for us, like, we like just got up and left to San Antonio, and to Houston, and we were over there for 11 months. And then we come back, and then the pandemic hit. We got back in March, and then everything shut down. So, I mean, for us, it worked out because we planned to stay for the full year. We were like, okay, we're just going to stay away from people. So it kind of worked out. But then we hit that year mark, and that was our plan, like, to start having her meet family, like her grandparents and, cousins, but it's just been so hard, and some family members have not been very supportive, and I think that's where it's hard.
Yeah, and that's something that makes it even more difficult when you can't go to certain people that you want to go to. My first recommendation would be to talk to the transplant center to find out if they have any recommendations for the level of risk that they're comfortable with you taking. Obviously, people who are sick, children who are in environments that are not in your bubble, are things that are going to be a risk to you. But I have brought people into my bubble that we know their situation, we know where they're going, they recognize my situation and know that they can't be out, at parties, and they can't be out doing this thing because it's going to be a risk of bringing something into our household. So I would look at your bubble with your transplant center and say, who can I safely bring into my bubble? You may have parents that are not out going, to parties every night and out to whatever people are doing now that is not safe.
Yeah.
And they're committed to making that 14-day quarantine to say, we're not going to do any of this stuff. We're going to completely quarantine ourselves so that we can have access personally to your daughter. But again, I don't know your daughter's background. I don't know her level of immune suppression. And so you are experiencing what a lot of people are experiencing, is that fatigue. And it's scary and it's dangerous. And so sometimes we have to go to professionals to help give an outside interpretation of what's going on with my life. Sometimes I have to see a psychiatrist, a psychologist, somebody that can look at it from an objective perspective and say, have you thought about this? And it'll allow you to look at something that you're so not overwhelmed, but you're so overtaken by your love of your child and you're wanting to make sure that she has a safe experience and grows to adulthood, that sometimes we don't see what's going around right outside of our perimeter that's available to us. And so, like I said, these are tumultuous times for anybody, but you throw COVID on top of it in an immune suppressed population, you are not experiencing anything that's abnormal. But I would try to find a way to get, if people are willing to quarantine, especially the people that you significantly want in her life, to say, okay, can we go into this quarantine? That's what we're doing with our living donors at the transplant center. That are the only people that I'm allowed to engage with, because they're strictly quarantined for 2 weeks before I actually have an engagement with them, before I see them in person. So it's a matter, you got to trust that these people are doing what they're supposed to do, which removes the risk to a certain extent that they're going to bring something dangerous into your household. But there are ways to do this by strict quarantining, and the people that you trust, the people that you most want to have some social interaction with your daughter. I would talk to this transplant center and say, can I do this in my bubble? Our grandson comes to our house every evening. He's in school, but we pick him up for an evening. He's here right now in our house, but he's not doing other things that are going to be at risk to us. And so we're comfortable with him being in our bubble. And so identify who that bubble is for you. Talk to your transplant center and say, do you see any problems knowing what's going on with my daughter, with me having this group of people engaging periodically, as long as they're quarantined before they come to see you? And hopefully the vaccine is going to come out and start turning some of this around. But again, nobody can tell us when.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I appreciate you bringing that up. I know it wasn't easy. And Darnell, thank you for your answer, because I think in some way or another, everybody in the TFC family is feeling that same exact that same exact feeling. We're down to interacting with people electronically, as opposed to being able to touch. I hope we can do that.
Yeah.
Dealing with a situation of historic proportions with this whole COVID-19 thing. And you're right, David, everybody is stressing over this thing because, like I said earlier, we're social beings. We need to have that contact with the people who are important to us, and we need to feel that hug. And it's so unnatural to go up to somebody and say hi and don't reach your hand out, or to hug them and to do those kinds of things. And so look at this maybe as an upfront investment in getting through this whole thing safely with your daughter. And then as we get more of the vaccinations and things that are starting to come onto the market, I'm just hopeful that in the near term, we can get back to hugging each other again.
Like for me, I understand Alexis completely. I wanted to see my mom. I hadn't seen her in a long time, but we did that. I asked her, okay, Mom, can you stay 14 days? Don't let nobody come to the house. I was ordering her HEB, like to delivery, so she wouldn't go to HEB at all. So she did it. She did it for 2 weeks. So she could come over, and she came and stayed with us for a couple of weeks. So that's how we did it. That's how I had her quarantine, not go nowhere, stayed at home. And that's how we felt safe for her to be able to come, and Ricky was here. But it's hard. Yeah. But that's how we were able to to do it. And you know, it was great to have her here. We were so excited. Ricky was so happy to have his grandma here for a couple of weeks. And we want her to come back, but it'd be the same thing. I would have her to start all over and quarantine again for 14 days before she would head out this way.
Did anybody else over this Thanksgiving holiday come up with some unique ways to make it safe for you to be in touch with your extended family?
We just did Zoom, like
Yeah.
Zoom, so we could just see each other. Yeah, everyone stayed at their home, and we just kind of Zoomed and talked to everybody.
No wonder Zoom just didn't crash on Thanksgiving right around dinner.
That's because the schools were all closed and that hadn't overwhelmed
Yeah.
it, because there's so
Yeah.
many things. It's like, oh my gosh, how are we keeping up with all of these kids that are on the internet trying to do their homework and that are working from home? We are really lucky to be in an environment that is so well developed, in a country that's so well developed that could keep up with these kinds of things. But there's nothing like hugging somebody that you love, and that really has been a real challenge for a lot of folks.
It is. It's been hard. It's been hard on everybody. But I also say it's okay to get emotional, Alexis. It's okay. It's normal. We're all going through it. It's okay. It's okay. And I'm
Thank
here.
you. I
If
just
I could do more, I would. I wish COVID was over so I could babysit for you or something.
I know. I just
Yeah.
feel like I cry at every Zoom meeting.
It's okay.
That's good.
It's
That's
okay.
therapeutic.
Yes.
That's healthy.
Yes. It's okay. We're here for you. That's okay.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank all of y'all for coming on here. I really appreciate it. Darnell, any final thoughts that you have for us?
No, it's just been a privilege being part of this with you, knowing that there is a support system like this available to folks that really need to have it more than anybody else. And so we're a very special group of people. We've been blessed, but we've also been challenged with a lot of things. And so it's been a privilege being able to share some of my experience with you. And I've learned from you as well that, you know, there's always a way around most of these situations, but sometimes it's not easy.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Well,
Thank you, Darnell.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Darnell.
Thank you.
Anytime, invite me back.
Yes.